let's take a look at this because this is it's a bit funny, but it's more of that. So this was so they have the big Anzac Day sports ball game with the gay AFL. Who I don't know what the teams are. I think it's Collingwood and Essendon, maybe. Could be wrong. Anyway, so they had their big hoo-ha at the MCG commemorating the Anzacs. And this is the bloke that they find to kind of wheel out as the representative of the as the digger. It's just
It's like who even cares? Who even cares? If you go to that degenerate gay Colleseum to watch that gay sport, then you're going to be bombarded with some gay level shit. So, like, I don't know what else you would expect to experience if you go to watch this football, this sports ball. I mean, football itself, the AFL is known across Australia as the gay AFL because it is heavily, heavily laced with consistent social political propaganda, whether it's promoting feminism, promoting homosexuality, promoting racial equality, promoting transgenderism. These football players are stamped with all sorts of social political logos. The ground itself is stamped with logos. The matches are named after certain social political endeavors and initiatives. It's just a gay Colosseum. If you go there, like I said, like you don't really. How can you expect to experience anything else? I think people don't have anything else to do. That's the problem. It's clever to hit something that is traditional as Australian football with this much propaganda because it forces it into the field of vision of all of these people who don't really have anything else to do other than drink beer and watch sports ball. And that is Australian tradition. Let's face it. It's laced into our culture. It's what people like to do. They like to go and support a football team and get all excited about it and get drunk with their friends. And that's what we've always done. That's what the Australian people have always done in the working class. And so this traditional process, this series of habits frequented, or these places frequented by the working class, this is how they choose to desensitize them to this messaging, I suppose, to constantly hit these places they frequent with all of this propaganda, whether it's direct propaganda or whether it's this kind of stuff where, like, we're going to dress, a Sudanese or an African character up like he's an Anzac soldier, to get the average mind accustomed to the idea that Black people or Africans are just like us. And they've done everything that we have done, and they have all the same rights that we have earned for ourselves, or they should have anyway, right? That's kind of what this insinuates. And to the average Australian, no one wants to be racist. No one wants to be the odd one out in that Colosseum there. And so they all kind of just, they turn a blind eye, even if they don't really like it. They don't say anything. And it contributes to that desensitization process, that psychological subversive process of normalizing this kind of reality. It's not a reality. I don't believe that there may have been one or two Black or African associates of the Anzac or the Australian New Zealand Army Corps. I don't know, but it certainly wasn't enough representation to have one.
I mean, they probably had a few Abos, but they wouldn't have had any Africans.
This is the thing. This represents a false reality at the end of the day, and it's very feminine to immerse yourself in a false reality and get angry at reality itself. What I mean by that is women, or the feminine, tend to seethe and cope and immerse themselves in imagined versions of reality. And we have this feminine tendency now that's promoted where people are expected to seethe and cope, or people do seethe and cope at the prospect or the concept or the reality that Australia was white. It was established by white men, and it was built by white men. It was fought for by white men. It was defended by white men. People seethe and cope with this kind of reality that we're seeing right now instead. No, we can't have any white identity. We can't have any white ethnic pride. Black people are just as much involved in Australia as us, and so we'll dress a Black man up like he was a soldier, although he wasn't. That's the way I see it, right? And I'm glad that
it's hilarious how black this guy is too. Like, they found the most dark chocolate, Negro in all of Melbourne and stuck him in a uniform. I mean, it's hilarious.
Well, I'm glad that my psychology is free enough that I can be confronted with the reality that Australia was white, that it was essentially a white ethno state. That's the way it was set up. I'm glad that I can just accept and understand that and not have to develop all these copes and not get angry and not stamp my feet and stick my fingers in my ears and start screaming racist, right? I'm glad that I'm mature and calm enough to just accept reality such as that. And I'm glad that I don't have to feel the need to subscribe to false realities such as the one that's being presented to us here on screen. That's essentially what it is. It's just a false reality.
Yeah, but it's just funny how they feel the need. Like they could have put an Aboriginal guy in the uniform, and then because there were actually a few Aboriginals at Gallipoli, it would have had some realism. It would have like made more sense. But
Right.
instead, they had to put the African guy in because they had to just go that extra step further, just to rub it in your face and make it totally ridiculous. Which I think is hilarious in a sense. It's like surely even a lot of the normies at home who see this go, that doesn't look right. Like surely it's got to trigger something. Um, but yeah, it's just funny. It's
I
just
don't
funny
think it
that they
does
can't help
anymore.
themselves.
I don't think it does anymore. That's the point I was making earlier. I think average people have been exposed to that kind of thing for so long that they don't think anything when they see it these days. And that's the point. Keep putting it into their field of vision. And I think there's a process. It was described by Napoleon Bonaparte of introducing people to a new reality or a new version of reality, changing their perception of reality to what you want it to be. It's a propaganda process. And the first time you try to do it, people get angry. Actually, no, sorry. The first time you do it, people don't even notice. They don't even pay attention. Then when they start to notice, they get angry. And then the third stage is it just becomes accepted as self-evident, the point that you're trying to make. And I think we're at that stage where, like, Africans or whatever race it is around the world being accepted as just as Australian as the rest of us. I think we're at the point where that is just being accepted as self-evident without any actual evidence being presented, other than what we've seen there in the previous slide.
Yeah, it's funny because like the African from like like genetic standpoint, like a sub-Saharan African or an Aboriginal Australian are about the furthest in the entire human genome that you can get from a white person in terms of difference. So like these are like the most different, possible people you could find to us, and they're the ones that they want to shove, down your throat.
Someone
Um,
says in the comments here, "What's a digger? I'm American." A digger is generally a soldier from the First World War, but also, from the Second World War too, I suppose.
Is it
They
become
call
slang just for Australian soldiers? But they originally got it from they were digging trenches in World War I, so
Right,
they
that's
just
what I was
called
going to
them
explain.
diggers.
It
Yeah,
was because they spent a lot of time digging trenches and in trench warfare, which was, mostly pertained to the First World War. So, the Australian diggers, Australian soldiers, that's what it means. It's a term that's used quite often, overused, I think, by subversive journalists that actually have enmity towards white Australia, but they use the term Australian diggers. They'll say stuff like, that diggers would be rolling in their graves if they could see how racist Australia has become, when Australia is actually far less racist, significantly less racist than it was in the time of these diggers. So, like, that's
the diggers will be are rolling in their graves at how unracist Australia has become. Like I'm not
right.
joking.
That's probably
It's just a
true.
fact.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, it's 100% true. It's not even a joke. I mean, I posted about this an old article written by Matty Grant from years ago called "The Anzacs Fought for White Australia." You can find it on the Nativist Herald. Maybe I can pull it up here. I might actually pull it up here so we can take a look at it because it's uh, it's a great kind of classic article. And I screenshot some of it and posted it on this like Chinese member of parliament just to kind of flex on him on Twitter during with his Chinese fought in Gallipoli
Have you
too, because
ever
apparently there was.
have you
Go
ever
ahead.
seen that? Have you seen that ABC? It might have been an old ABC interview where they interviewed people in the early 20th century, asking them what they thought of intermarriage, like racial intermarriage between different races, and almost everyone disagreed with it. It was like in 1930 or 1940 or something. Almost everybody in Australia disagreed with it, just random people on the street. And all these people were extremely well spoken and had their own reasons. They had their own understanding of it. One woman said she thinks it's not fair on the children, and that's if they believe that we should keep Australia white, that's what makes Australia what it is. We are a white nation. And these were just people, here we go. Someone says it was in the 1960s, so it wasn't even that long ago. These were just regular working class people. And their English was phenomenally better than anything you would see spoken these days. They were well-dressed, well-presented, and they had sensible opinions. It just goes to show what's the degenerative effects that the modern system and its propaganda has had on our country. When you go back and look at the way people used to hold themselves, the way they used to speak, the way they used to dress, and the predispositions they had, you can really see the amount of damage that's being done to this nation. And I think every white nation around the world pretty much could say the same for every white nation.
Some of those old clips are great from like the 60s, and they go up to some guy in the street and they say, "Do you think we should take more migrants from Japan?" And he said, "Absolutely not." And he said, "Why? Don't you think we need some more
I
workers
remember that
away from
guy.
it?"
Yeah,
And
he
he
was the
said,
most.
he said,
He was the
"One
most racist.
Australian's worth 10 Japs,"
Yeah, he was the most
Um,
racist out of all those interviews. How did I know that you would remember him the most?
oh, yeah, that guy was based. But the general Australia was a white nationalist country. The whole country was people like us, 100 years ago or less,
But it's the
80 years
current
ago,
year.
70 years ago.
It's 2023 now. It's the current year. So I suppose you and I should stop living in a previous year and adjust ourselves to the current year where everything is acceptable because it's the current year. I
Yeah.
love that. I just think it was the most ridiculous argument.
What's also ridiculous about conservatives in Australia, though, because conservatives are supposed to have reverence for the founders of a nation. So, like in America, the conservative discourse, obviously, they do it like they edit out all the racism as well, but like they always go on about Thomas Jefferson and the Constitution and the founding fathers and blah, blah, blah. And that's what they really derive their legitimacy from. This is what America was supposed to be, and this is what the intentions of the founders were, etc. In Australia, we almost never talk about the founding fathers, because if we did, you'd realize that every single founding father of Australia they were all white nationalists, like to a
Someone
man.
in the comments here, someone says you could even say Australia was a national socialist before Germany was. Not necessarily. National socialism is a very open and consistent celebration and reinforcement of racial pride. I don't think that was happening. Maybe that could have prevented Australia from being broken down racially. But I definitely wouldn't say that Australia was National Socialist. National Socialist is definitely government administered racial pride. The government keeps encouraging and reinforcing racial pride in the people, in the education system, through the education system, and it happens every day consistently. That's probably the best way to preserve and protect a race, realistically, and that's what National Socialism essentially is at its core, about preserving and protecting a specific race that adopts that philosophy. So I wouldn't say Australia was ever National Socialist.
Yeah, I mean, it was a white nationalist country. That's not up for dispute. But the specific connotations of National Socialism obviously pertain to the specific characteristics of basically, the Weimar Republic. You have all these different parties. You have, the Social Democrats, you've got the Communists, you've got, the center right party, the Catholic Conservative Christian Democracy Party, and so on. And the whole philosophy of National Socialism was that having all of these different parties was dividing the German spirit, and that the Germans needed to be unified under one politics, as opposed to having these internal divisions between parties that represent different class interests or different philosophies, and so on. Australia, it still had liberalism. Like Australia had this kind of view of, maintaining a political process where there were different representations for different classes. We did have the Nationalist Party. So in the First World War, Billy Hughes was the Prime Minister of Australia, a great man of Australian history, and he was he was from the Labor Party originally, but he was a staunch loyalist to the British Empire, and a lot of elements of the Labor Party at that time were like Irish Catholic types who weren't so supportive of the British Empire for obvious reasons, particularly at that time in history. And so, he supported conscription during World War One, and was far more bullish about Australia's involvement, whereas they wanted to kind of minimise Australia's involvement. So he split from the Labor Party with more nationalistic, less Republican type elements of the Labor Party, and created what was called the National Labor Party. And then they ended up fusing with elements from kind of conservative elements, which kind of like the what has become the Liberal Party today, way back when, through various iterations of kind of development. And they created the Nationalist Party. And this Nationalist Party kind of had that vibe of being kind of class collaborative, where it wasn't about having like a working class party versus a middle class party. It was like, we need one national party, one national policy to suit all of Australia and the benefit of Australia at large. And so that was kind of moving in that kind of direction, that kind of general philosophy, but it didn't repudiate parliamentary democracy. I didn't really feel like parliamentary democracy was in a crisis in Australia at that time as well, to be fair. I mean, in Australia, we had a very functional society, prosperous, well-to-do. There was political battles, and it wasn't a utopia, but it was nowhere near as bad as the Weimar Republic in the 1920s. And so I think like the existential crisis that the Germans felt themselves in meant they needed a far more extreme solution than how Australians felt, which was like, well, there's disputes between the parties, but they kind of have a broad consensus on a lot of the key issues that really matter, particularly like the White Australia policy and so on. And we had it pretty good. It was kind of a working man's paradise of sorts, Australia. And so probably due to that, there was simply not this impulse. We need to overthrow the system, ban all the other parties, institute a more autocratic system of government, because you only really feel that impulse when there's domestic enemies that you feel need to be crushed.
Right. Someone in the comments is saying Joel going big brain mode. I can honestly say I think Joel only has two modes. One is big brain mode, and the other is giving other people a turn. But, he could very